Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, and my co-host is Janet Corsi. The topic of today's show is writing a memoir or biography. Our guests for today's show are Debbie Wright, author of the biography Uncompromised, the Lupe Anquiano Story, and Morgan St. James, co-author of the memoir Incest, Murder, and a Miracle. Before we get to our guest, my panel and I would like to read a few fun jokes, quips, quotes. Jan, would you like to start?
Yes, I would. An autobiography is a obituary in serial form, with the last installment missing. Quentin Crisp.
And Debbie?
I am a writer. If I seem cold, it's because I'm surrounded by drafts.
All right, and Morgan?
Mary Chase, Mary Chase, the author of Harvey, who was a journalist, playwright, and novelist. An actress once said to her, "I enjoyed reading your book. Who wrote it for you?" Mary replied, "Darling, I'm so glad you liked it. Who read it to you?"
That's good.
And mine is the American poet and short story writer Dorothy Parker was approached by a drunk man. The drunk man said, "I can't bear fools." Dorothy Parker replied, "Apparently your mother could." All right, if you are just tuning in, you are listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, along with my co-host, Janet Corsi, and our guests are Debbie Wright and Morgan St. James. The topic of our show is writing a biography or memoir. And Jan, I'm going to let you introduce our first guest.
I'd love to. Debbie is a native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and currently resides in Southern California. She has been a news writer for finance, educator, food, and restaurant. She is an industrial film producer and an executive producer of automotive shows, as well as regional finance marketing manager for a major car manufacturer.
All right, and when Debbie met and got to know the remarkable Lupe Anquiano several years ago, she realized that she had to use her writing skills and experience to tell the story of this unsung hero and her courageous fight for equality, justice, and dignity for all. Debbie, please tell us a little bit about Uncompromised.
So the book came about when I met Lupe at a lunch with my husband over 10 years ago now, and we just clicked, even though at that time I knew very little about her other than the fact that she had been a former nun. I kind of got her as a person on a spiritual level. Her belief in God, the need for her to do whatever God put in front of her is something I understand very well from my own Catholic upbringing. So I believe she knew she could trust me with her story. She told us that she had several people send her proposals to write her life story, but she didn't get a good feeling about them and felt that they might sensationalize aspects of her life that were not really important, and she did not want to be exploited. So, at the time, her archives were, added to the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center. It happened to be on March 12, 2007, and that's how she popped up on my husband's radar. And he reached out to her to see what she'd been up to. They had worked together when my husband was at Verizon, and she was looking for funding for the Cisco Academy from Verizon.
Okay.
So during our conversation, my husband told Lupe that I was currently between jobs, which I was, and I was a writer. And then he abruptly excused himself and went to the restroom. So she takes a look at me and says, asked if this was project I would want to take on. And, she really couldn't pay me anything. She was on Social Security. So it really wasn't a work for hire situation, but the risk was kind of all mine, although she never asked to read anything I had written, so it was kind of blind trust on her part too. So I just began visiting her once a week or so with a list of questions I planned to ask her. And I, being a news reporter for a local newspaper, I just start at the beginning, and as the months went on, I heard more and more about all she had done. I became more excited about the prospects of this book. And how could one very unassuming-looking person have done so much, and yet no one knew about her? Yeah, she was a hidden figure.
From what I've read, this is absolutely extraordinary. Do you have any future works that you're thinking about doing?
Well, after 6 years of research, writing, editing, and finally publishing the book, I'm still finishing my work by making sure the book is received well and people find out about this amazing person, Lupe Anquiano.
We're going to try to
So
help.
as far as a future book, I have some ideas and maybe a spin-off from this book, or maybe I will write about the experience of writing this biography. That could be maybe a short story, but it was quite a learning experience.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I know you were talking about it took you 6 years to put this project together. And she's 88 now. Is that what you told me when we were speaking on the phone? Yeah.
Yes, she's 88.
So.
And she's still going strong. Still fighting. She's still fighting now for environmental causes.
Now, the interesting thing about her story is that she knew a lot of people. Can you just mention a few of the people that she encountered in her lifetime? Because she went to Washington, D.C., and you said it met with 3 presidents.
Right. She was first brought to Washington, D.C. by Lyndon Johnson. He found out about her somehow through the Teen Post program that she had started, and he wanted her to come to Washington, D.C. to help with Mexican-American relations. So she started there, and then she got frustrated and started a bilingual program. That didn't work because of some bureaucracy. So she came back to California and called Cesar Chavez, and he said, "I told you so. I told you it wouldn't work." And he put her on the Great Boycott. So, she was there when Robert Kennedy was shot. She knows Gloria Steinem. She's been, with Bella Abzug. She's been around a lot of really famous women, and all related to empowering women. Her most important success story is getting women off of welfare. She was able to work in San Antonio eventually and get women to basically burn their welfare checks and march to the Capitol and say, "We don't want welfare, we want jobs."
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Debbie, where can we find out more about you? Do you have a website?
Yes. We have lupeanquianostory.com, and the book is available on Amazon by searching Uncompromised, so Lupe Anquiano Story. You can like our Facebook page, Uncompromised, the Lupe Anquiano Story, and it's worth mentioning that 50% of the proceeds from the Amazon book sales go to the Lupe Anquiano Leadership Scholarship Fund that is hosted at UCLA.
That's nice. That's nice.
Wonderful.
Well, our next guest is Morgan St. James. She is the author of numerous books, including 3 memoirs and 1 autobiography. She is the co-author of the Silver Sisters Mysteries, along with Phyllis Bradner. That's your sister, I believe.
Yes.
And Morgan's short stories have won awards, garnered recognition from Writer's Digest, and has appeared in Chicken Soup for the Soul books, as well as many other anthologies. Incest, Murder, and a Miracle won in the True Crime category, International Book Awards. A Corpse in the Soup won Best Mystery Audiobook in the Best Books. There are many more awards, but I defer to Morgan's website, Morgan St. James, and that's morganstjames-author.com. Correct?
That's right.
All right. In addition, Morgan has written over 600 published articles related to the craft and business of writing. Morgan, please tell us a little bit about Incest, Murder, and a Miracle, and how you became involved in the project.
Well, it's really kind of interesting. I've written books with a true crime author, Dennis N. Griffin, and Cheryl and Rob Cuccio approached them about helping to write their memoir. A local editor had referred them to Denny, and unfortunately Denny was tied up with some true crime projects, and he couldn't take the project on. And so since we've collaborated before very successfully, he called me and he said, "Hey, what does your schedule look like?" And I said, "Why are you asking?"
Yeah.
Because I know he always had an agenda when he did that.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I've got this interesting project that I can't take on, and I think the people would be fine if you've got the time." And I said, "Well, I'm pretty busy on some projects." He says, "Let me tell you about it." So these people were all over the media in 1986, 7, 8, and 9. And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, Cheryl Pearson was an abused 16-year-old, and she was also subjected to incest by her father. Her mother was dead. And when the father started to threaten her 8-year-old sister, she was desperate. She didn't know what to do. She hired a classmate to kill her father, and the classmate did.
And I would believe it was for $1,000 is what she originally...
Well, yeah, originally it was $1,000, and then after the man was killed, they could only get their hands on $400.
Wow.
So that's what he was given. And she never really thought it was going to happen, nor did Rob, who was her boyfriend at the time,
Yeah.
and now has been her husband for nearly 30 years. And so Rob broke. The cops came to him. They knew he was involved, and Cheryl wound up going to prison for 3.5 months of a 6-month sentence as a youth.
So she was 16, right?
She was 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, by the time the thing got to trial, she was, I think, 17 or 18.
Yeah.
But the kid who shot her father got a maximum of 25 years and served 16. And the difference was that she was sentenced as a youthful offender, and she was not the one who pulled the trigger. Well, it set off just a tsunami of media.
Yeah.
It was on TV, it was in the news, it was on the radio, it was everywhere. And of course, Denny told me all this as an inducement.
Yes.
And I said, well, is there any more to it? Because he and I had written an abuse story together.
Uh-huh.
And he said, well, yeah. He said, her husband died. I said, Rob died? How's he writing the book?
Yeah.
And he said, Rob is a miracle. I said, really? Tell me about it. And he said that because of malpractice and a misdiagnosis, Rob died for 43 minutes in 2012. He had a massive heart attack that killed him. There was no pulse. There was no oxygen to his brain, and he was pronounced dead at 30 minutes. Cheryl wouldn't accept it. She couldn't believe that her husband was dead, and she had also vowed to herself that she would never be a victim again. And she had become a strong woman, and she begged and she pleaded and she pushed for the doctors to keep trying to revive him. And finally they said, well, we'll give you 10 minutes more, but then you have to let him go. I said, really? Now that's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And he said, yes. And what's more fascinating is that Rob came back to life at 8 minutes with 2 minutes left to spare. And the doctors couldn't believe it. Anyway, I got involved in the project. Cheryl and Rob had already written a lot, and they were calling their manuscript 10 minutes more. But when I heard the whole story, I said, we need to go to more of a grabber title.
Yeah.
Because 10
Yeah.
minutes more doesn't tell us the story.
Yeah.
Well, no,
And-
because it doesn't set up her story.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And so I took the things that they had written. We spent a lot of time on the telephone and on emails, and it took about 1.5 years to write the book. And we got it to a point where it's a very, very compelling story. And it's something that publishers didn't know how to deal with it because it's mixed genre.
Yeah.
It's true crime and it's inspirational. And they couldn't put the two together.
Right.
And we did have an agent, but things weren't moving fast enough. And the thing was, they were scheduled to go on Discovery ID to kick off the Eyewitness series.
Oh, uh-huh.
And so we wanted to take advantage of that. We told the agent, you know what, we're going to self-publish because we need to take advantage of this publicity.
Right.
And as it turned out, that wasn't the only publicity. They have been on Discovery ID twice. They've been profiled in People magazine. They were just on Inside Edition. There are some other really big things in the wind that I can't talk about yet. There are more TV shows coming up. And in this instance, it was a wise decision to
Yeah.
self-publish the book.
Yeah.
But if I can say one
Sure.
more thing, and I have to say this because as fascinated as I was with the fact that Rob came back to life, all of the TV programs so far have said, oh, yes, we'll talk about that. it's wound up on the cutting room floor.
Oh, no.
All of the shows have concentrated, of course, on the true crime aspect and the fact that she had the father killed and went to jail. Same thing happened with People magazine. And I'm hoping when people read the book, they will realize how much more there was to the story and how far these two people grew and went through the pain of writing this book so that they can help other victims and survivors.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious as well because I know you just said you decided to go ahead and self-publish.
Right.
Debbie, did you self-publish your book?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Now, was that set up through Lupe or through your company?
Oh, no. Everything is through our company. Like
Okay.
I said, all the risk is on us.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. All right. Morgan, what is your next project? Because I know you're always doing something.
You're right, I'm always doing something. Oh, my God. Let's see. No More Crying Angels, which is also an abuse survival memoir, will be published, or excuse me, it will be released on October 14th. It's currently available for pre-order on Amazon and on Smashwords and on several other sites. And I'm also just about at the point with the third, I have to think for a minute. Yeah, the third book in the Revenge is Fun series.
Okay.
And that one is called Payback. And it's a fun romp, as are most of those. The other books in the series are Bumping Off Fat Vinny and
I love the book
Rip-Off.
cover on that.
Oh, well, we just actually changed it to make
Did
it.
you?
Yeah, well, he's still there.
Okay.
Vinny with his cigar
Okay,
is still there.
gotta have Vinny.
But we changed the format of it a little bit to make it relate to the rest of the books in the Revenge is Fun series.
Are you still writing with your sister?
We are starting the 5th book in the Silver Sisters Mysteries within a couple of months. There are now 4 books in that series. And that's A Corpse in the Soup, and Terror in a Teapot, Vanishing Act in Vegas, and Diamonds in the Dumpster.
Yeah.
I just want to know, where did you get the extra 10 hours a day to do all of this? Because this is not a 24-hour-a-day thing that you're doing.
Well, Janet, that's only the tip of the iceberg.
With you, I can believe it.
Yeah, I also publish the quarterly Writer's Tricks of the Trade online magazine.
Yes,
I
you
give
do.
workshops and serve on panels and do things like this, James
Yeah.
and Janet. I
Yeah.
mean, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome.
And it's funny because I have a writer friend. Actually, he's the person who induced me to start publishing when one of my publishers went out of business. And Mike Dennis always used to say to me, I'm just curious, what do you do with those 2 minutes you have left over every day?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I want to know where you found them.
Well, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing, and I'm the host, James Kelly. My co-host is Janet Corsi, and our guests for today's show are Debbie Wright and Morgan St. James, and the topic is writing a biography or memoir. Next week, we will be discussing autobiographies, and they're all kind of similar. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Now on to our topic. According to the Oxford Dictionary, a memoir is a historical account or biography written from personal knowledge. A biography is an account of somebody's life written by somebody else, complete with details of the most important parts. A biography gives an account or detailed description about the life of a person. It entails basic facts such as childhood, education, career, relationships, family, and death. A biography portrays the experiences of all these events that occur in the life of a person, usually in chronological order. The person or writer who writes biographies is called a biographer. And we're going to get into this, and everyone's going to help me with this. And Morgan, I'm going to let you start off, and then we're going to talk about each segment.
Okay, well, and this is interesting because just yesterday I gave a workshop for the Anthem Writers Group, and guess what it was about?
What was it about?
Memoirs.
Oh, all right.
Okay,
good.
so there are 3 types of biography. And just as James previously mentioned, an autobiography tells the story of a person's life that they have written themselves. However, there are times when the autobiographer may seek guidance from a ghostwriter or a collaborator.
And sort of that's what you did, Debbie. You were kind of Well, you're on the title of the book, though, so you're just part of the biography in that you wrote it.
Right. I'm the author.
You're the, yeah.
She lived it. I wrote it.
And I want to talk about the difference because Debbie wrote a biography, and I guess it's because she's telling the story of someone else.
Right.
But you wrote what you're saying is a memoir, but it's also telling the story of someone else.
Well, actually, we look at it as a team effort, and it is, excuse me, it is Rob and Cheryl's story, and they were the ones that would feed me the things. I organized everything. I helped edit everything, but it's really their story.
So they helped write the story.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that I was very, very careful about, because there are chapters that are told from Cheryl's point of view, and there are chapters that are told from Rob's point of view. And they both have extremely different voices.
Right.
And Rob is pure New York. I love the way he writes. And so it was important to me to preserve their voices. I'm kind of the person in the back being the co-author, but it's them telling their story. And all of the reviews say how much the reader felt that Rob and Cheryl were in the room talking to them.
And Debbie, in your case, you did all the research pretty much, but you said you spoke on the phone with her, but you pretty much wrote the book. Is that correct?
Yes, I wrote everything. She had written some articles, and there were some other books written about her back in the day, but nothing like this, nothing like a complete biography of her whole life.
All right. And now, Jan, I'm going to let you talk about a memoir here.
Well, a memoir. This is a more focused term than an autobiography or a biography. In a memoir, a writer himself or herself narrates the details of a particular event or situation which occurred in his or her lifetime.
Now, I have experience with that. I've helped with 2 memoirs. This radio show started on the premise of someone's memoir. We did a book launching.
Right. Remember?
I remember that.
Yeah, and it was Sonia Leeson Cahalan's memoir. And they approached me. Someone from the radio station came to the book launching and said, "Did you ever think about talking about this on the radio?" And I said, "No, I never thought about doing radio." And that's really how that whole thing came about. In fact, she was on my very first show.
Yes.
And what's interesting about it, because we were going to talk about the differences, is that basically I was kind of, I didn't really ghostwrite it because she had written it, but I had to formulate it in the sense that I had to put it in some kind of format, organize it, and then help with the editing of it. So I kind of guided the whole process. And then the second one was Angels Never Die, which also we did a book launching for her as well. And that one was a true memoir.
Yes.
Although I really did kind of revamp everything on that one as well. In fact, I did a lot of work on that one.
Yeah, well, my experience has been pretty much what your first one was that you described.
Yeah.
Where the Cuccios and also Bella, who wrote No More Crying Angels with me, they both did the same thing. They had tremendous input, and then in the case of No More Crying Angels, it was Dennis and I. And we organized, edited, helped expand things, gave prompts to pull more information, made suggestions. But in the end, it was the same sort of thing.
I think the difference is, though, in my case, my name was never attached to either book.
Okay.
And I never even thought about asking to put my name on the book, to be honest with you. So that's the difference, that I don't get credit for those.
Well, you did the same job, though.
I did the job. I just didn't get credit. And Debbie, I'd like you to read the next portion.
So a biography narrates the life story of a person, written by another person or writer, and can be divided into 5 categories: popular biography, historical biography, literary biography, reference biography, or fictional biography.
You had mentioned, Morgan, in one of your pieces that you did something that was considered non-fictional. It was kind of fictional. Yeah.
Confessions of a Cougar.
Yeah, right. It's sort of autobiography, but it's...
I mean, people ask me if I've done autobiography or memoir of my own, and I usually say no, I haven't, but Confessions of a Cougar is 95% or so true, although the names have been changed.
To protect the innocent?
To protect the innocent, and a little creative license was taken, and it's presented as fiction. But trust me, I lived it.
Yes.
Now, Debbie, yours is more of a historical biography in a way, because you're basically telling the history of this woman, and you're going back to the archives when she worked with the different presidents. So it's really I would guess you would say it was kind of a historical biography.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
I mean, Lupe is very much alive still today.
Right,
so
yeah.
It's not quite a traditional historical biography,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of history in it.
I'm just curious. I have to ask this question. How does she feel now that this book is in print?
She's actually elated.
Ah.
I mean, there's so many. She's getting so many people calling her Henry Cisneros, Gloria Steinem, Elaine Madsen. Elaine Madsen is actually going to feature us in her. She has an e-magazine. I don't know if you know her daughter, Virginia Madsen.
Yes,
played
yes.
Sideways, Michael Madsen. So Elaine is good friends with Lupe and had had featured her in one of Elaine's in one of her documentaries called "I Know a Woman Like That." So when she read the book, she was just off the chart happy. And,
Wow.
and Lupe was very happy that I kept everything true to her story, and I didn't sensationalize anything. I just kind of let her story flow the way she told it to me.
So is it in chronological order?
Pretty much. I mean, the beginning of the book, we did a kind of flash forward about, all the women that she helped, and, kind of a synopsis of where they were and where they are today. And then I started at the beginning from her family and beginning her mom Spanish, her dad Indian, and then, how she was brought up in this Catholic, very traditional Catholic household, all the, the typical traditional holidays that they spent. And that kind of, formed her as a child. And then, she took that with her when she was a nun and a missionary nun, and also she taught catechism at Glendale High School.
Mm-hmm.
So she would teach her children, these are high school kids, and she was a fun nun because she was young.
Yeah.
And she always got in trouble for doing, crazy stuff. But kind of like Sally Field.
Yeah, I was going to say, is she the flying nun or what?
Yeah, sort of like that. But she taught her children to three things: observe, judge, and act. And so she just, that was her mantra, and she lived what she said. She observed, judged, and then acted on what she felt she needed to do.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, unlike a biography, which is a true account of someone else's life, an autobiography is focused account of a writer's life told through the writer's own point of view. So if I wrote it or you wrote it, our point of view. Well, the writer's point of view.
Well, my mom's memoir is actually an autobiography, and it was written by her when she was 80 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
Well, to say it more clearly, an autobiography is written by you, whereas a biography is written by somebody else about you.
Yeah.
The function of writing biographies is to provide details regarding the life of a person or a thing in an entertaining but informative manner. By the end of a biography, the reader feels like they are well acquainted with the subject. Biographies are often nonfiction, but many biographers also use novel-like format because a storyline would become more entertaining with the inclusion of strong explanation, I can't even say it, rising conflict and then climax. This is important because when we set out to write Sonia Leeson Kalen's, I guess you'd say, memoir, we set out to make it sound like a novel.
Uh-huh.
I mean, because it really was interesting enough. It could have easily been a novel. Yeah. If you read it, you often think that can't. So many things happened to her that you would think that's not real. That could never have happened. But you have to understand she's Filipino, and in the Filipino culture, there are things different than what we accept
It's
in
very-
our
sure,
culture.
yeah.
So, and we did deliberately set out to make it sound like a novel, even though it's true. It's all true, everything she wrote. And Debbie, what type of biography did you write? What was the format you used?
It would be considered historical biography. It's like I said, she's very much alive today, so it's not quite traditional historical. But
Did you write it? Does it read? How does it read? Does it read like not first
Well-
person because you wrote it, but
right, yeah, I used a lot of her own quotes and others that I interviewed, like Henry Cisneros down in San Antonio, or at the time he was mayor of San Antonio when she was working with him, and so I traveled around and interviewed all these different people, and then just pieced it together, and then we inserted what was happening in the world at the times that she was, we just kind of had to stuff and fluff, throughout
right?
the book.
So an
to
update of what was happening around the situation you were writing
give
about.
it context.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Morgan, how did you get involved in writing so many memoirs?
Well, that's a good question. Because I do write on various levels. And I would say that probably my book, Betrayed, is the first one that I got into, but it was all done as fiction. And it was what's called a creative approach to it, because I took facts that I knew about this particular person and crime and wove it into a fictional novel and then expanded it to become a murder mystery. And it was something that I had wanted to do for so many years, but I didn't have the writing experience to be able to handle a project like that. And the reason I say I started that way is that it actually took me 16 years to get to a point where I felt the book was publishable.
Yes.
And the only reason that I knew about the story, and it was a true story as far as the inspiration for this book, is that this kidnapping happened to my cousin. And it was not something that was ever promoted in the newspapers. It was kept very quiet. And I always knew that I wanted to write that story. Okay, so the reason I mention it is because had I not written that, I probably could not have worked with Rob and Cheryl, nor could I have worked with Bella Capo.
Right.
Because I had to have the understanding of how to humanize these things and how to make the reader be able to feel something for the people that it was being written about.
Yeah.
And so Betrayed was my training ground on that. And when I started writing with Bella Capo, it was the same situation, but in a different way than yours because of the true crime and all the various things that happened. And there were so many things that we had to figure out what to leave out.
Yeah.
And then when I got to Rob and Cheryl, it was the same kind of thing. I will say, for the type of memoirs I've helped write, excluding my mother's, which is a very funny one, but these heavy, dramatic ones.
And they are.
Oh, they're very hard to write because they take a lot out of you, because you have to get into that person's head for the reader to believe what you're writing. And so it wasn't unusual for me to be sitting at the keyboard with tears streaming down my face because I was in their head.
Yeah.
Well, I had the, both of mine were very heavy subjects as well.
So you know.
Yeah, Sonia's was about the death of her son. And then, actually, and then with Gwen, hers was the death of 4 boys.
Four sons.
So
Yeah.
I believe me, I relate. And, her son's death was something that happened suddenly and unexpectedly, whereas Gwen's was over a 20-year period, which
Right.
they suffered for 20 years.
Yeah.
So they were different, but her story also was dramatic when she lived in the Philippines
Yeah.
before she came to the United States. So I totally understand. You really do have to get into the mindset of that person. That's the hardest thing, I think, is knowing what questions to ask.
Yes.
Because as you're writing the story, as someone who writes a biography or a memoir, you're trying to figure out, well, why did they say this, or why are they doing this? So you have to go back to them and find out. And oftentimes you have to go back to where the story led up to that point and say, well, how did it
Absolutely.
get to that point? You know,
Absolutely.
so it's real important to listen to the people who are
yeah.
you're writing for.
No, in
Yeah.
fact, I'll tell you, when we were proofing Incest, Murder, and a Miracle, there is one chapter that none of us could get through being the reader without breaking down.
Yeah.
And I was as involved in it as they were. And that had to do with the death of Rob's mother.
Well, I can tell you right now, there were 4 times when I cried with Gwen's book, and it was
Yes.
every time one of her children were on their
Oh,
deathbed.
yeah, yeah.
Those kids were so brave. So I totally relate to that,
Yeah.
And then with Sonia, she literally found out her son died by watching the news.
Ooh.
And she happened to work for the DMV, and she noticed the license plate of this vehicle where the accident happened.
Oh, my
They had
God.
not called her yet.
Oh.
And then she started trying to inquire as to, she was calling around, that's my son's car.
Yeah.
So that would be a horrible way to find out.
Horrid.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jerry Jenkins, a New York Times bestselling novelist and biographer, states that a memoir is not a fancy literature term for an autobiography, even though we often hear the terms used interchangeably. And you talked about that a little
Right.
earlier. Your memoir will be autobiographical, but it will not be your life story. Simply put, an autobiography is likely to cover one's birth to the present, emphasis often on accomplishments, but the more honest and revelatory, the better. A memoir draws on select anecdotes from your life to support a theme and make a point. For instance, if your point is how you came from some unlikely place to where you are now, you would choose scenes from your life to support that. For example, maybe you came from the wrong side of the tracks, like a broken home. You write often about that. Victim of abuse, an addict, or an orphan. From there, you rose to a position of wealth, status, happiness, health, or faith. And the reason why I mention this is because, although I think we mentioned that earlier, a lot of times autobiographies or memoirs can sell even if you're not well known.
Absolutely. My mother's is a good example.
Yeah, I mean, it helps if you have a name, and Lupe, even with Lupe, Debbie, she wasn't known until you wrote this book, per se, in the public's eye.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if it's someone, it's the story itself that
Yes.
sells or draws the attention.
Well,
He-
it was strange because she she received national recognition. She was on 60 Minutes, but then it would ebb and flow, and people, she would just go back into the background and behind the scenes, and nobody, focused on what she had accomplished. It was just, okay, that's old news.
Yeah, it was move on to the next story.
Yeah, because it's not like someone who's in the limelight every day, like an actor or a singer
Right,
or,
right.
Someone who's got notoriety. So, but it is interesting how those type books still sell. He goes on to say that memoirs by nobodies succeed all the time. And for one reason, they resonate with readers because readers identify with the truth. Truth, even harder, gritty, painful truth, bears transferable principles. So when writing your memoir, keep in mind, you may be the subject, but it's not about you. It's about the readers, what readers can gain from your story.
Yeah.
And that's an important part, too. I think it's real important that you end it in some way with what is the purpose of this? What was the reason for writing this? And I know, Debbie, you did that with Lupe's. Don't stop, don't give up. Keep going no matter what.
Exactly. The message at the end of Incest, Murder, and a Miracle is that you don't have to be defined by the horrible things that have happened to you.
Yeah.
And the message at the end of No More Crying Angels is never stop fighting.
Uh-huh.
And so, both of these strong women had a real reason for writing their book, in that they wanted to help others who were going through what they did, or maybe not quite as bad, or maybe worse.
Uh-huh.
And they wanted to send this message. And so it's really important to know your theme, as James said.
Mm-hmm.
What are you trying to address when you write this memoir? Yeah. And we have something, you're not alone. What happened to me can also happen to you. And these 2 books that I'm talking about are a perfect example of that, because when Incest, Murder, and a Miracle came out, Cheryl and Rob have received emails and letters from all over the world with people saying, thank you for writing your book because it's given me the courage to speak up about what happened to me.
Uh-huh.
And as far as No More Crying Angels, you know, it's in pre-order now. There are some early readers on it.
Uh-huh.
And the thing that happened to her, the reason for the title, is that from the abuse she suffered from a mob-connected father, she had gotten to the point as a small child where she couldn't even cry. She was so traumatized and so abused that she couldn't cry. And as an adult, having gone through therapy, having gone through many, many experiences that none of us could even imagine, she finally learned how to cry.
Aw,
Isn't that
And
something?
she had had a tattoo of a crying angel on her back so that the angel could cry for her.
Uh-huh.
So, you know your theme, know what you're trying to get across.
yeah.
And then something called cosmic commonalities. You know, all people, regardless of their age, their ethnicity, their location, their social status, they share certain felt needs. What about food? What about shelter? And what about love?
Yeah.
They fear abandonment. They fear loneliness and the loss of loved ones. So regardless of what your theme is, if it touches on any of those wants and fears, you will have readers who will identify with it.
Well, you know, and when we wrote the first one with Sonia, all the elements you just spoke of were in her book as well, in that she was abandoned by her mother. She was raised by an older sister. She was abused. And then she needed out, and she found a way out by actually I don't know that she fell in love with the guy across the street, but he was her way out. And then that's how she ended up in America. But, you know, you do have to find that theme or find out what it is that's going to drive that person to the point. If you didn't have that in the story, I don't think it would be a story.
No, absolutely. And that kind of leads us to the third thing, which is what's unique about your story.
Yeah.
You know, while it's true, as the Bible says, that there's nothing new under the sun,
Right.
No one has written your particular story, your particular memoir, your way.
Right.
There might be things that are very, very, in fact, there will be things that are very, very common threads through various genres of memoirs. But there's always going to be something about you and the way you tell your story that separates you from those who have come before you and those who will come after you.
Right.
Very
And
true.
you have to get in touch with that thing.
Right.
You have to be able to have something that's unique in the way that you express it that will make people want to read your book because it's your theme
Right.
and it happened to you,
Right.
and that's it.
You know, what's interesting is that in our own personal lives, we like we're just sitting here at this table right now. Even though there's 3 of us on the radio, there's 4 in the room. And, you know, the interesting is we don't know really anything about any one of us.
Right.
Only what we've shared in our, you know, in the times that we've known each other over the
Right.
years. And I think there is a story in almost everyone. And we don't even realize it half the time who that person is sitting there. So, you know, those are the things that people look for when they're looking for a biography or an autobiography or a memoir, is something to relate to. That they have that feeling as well.
Right.
And
Right.
Jen?
The publisher Macmillan offers this worksheet for writing a biography.
We've all got it tonight.
I learned from the best.
Thank you.
Think of the person you're writing about. What makes their story different from the everyday Joe? Early life. Number 1, who is this person? Where were they born? When were they born? That's always special.
Yeah.
And what did their parents do? What else do you know about their parents?
It's not always important to know that, but sometimes that can add to the story.
Well, particularly if the parents have some sort of an interesting background,
Yeah.
or something shocking,
Yeah.
or something that is so all-encompassing that you wish you knew these people.
Right. Debbie, you had to do that, I'm pretty sure, with Lupe's book. You had to give an idea where she was born and her background.
Oh, absolutely. So she actually grew up on a railroad, in bunkhouses at the railroad in Colorado.
Wow.
So she didn't know she was poor. She felt they were really rich because her mom would,
Yeah.
her mom would do certain, special things for Christmas and hide presents. She didn't even know where these presents came from. Her mom would hand sew dresses for her and her sisters, and it was just, she lived a very full, happy life. She didn't know what she didn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of this. I worked with someone once who was from Mexico, but they were from the mountains of Mexico. They did not have electricity. They did not have running water. They grew all their own food on their own land.
Yeah.
So they had land, but that's about it. He didn't know he was poor because they had everything they ever wanted.
Yeah.
They had their own,
Yeah, right.
their own cattle. They had their own crops. It didn't matter. They didn't have water or electricity. What was water and electricity?
Yeah.
They had haul their water. They had, didn't have electricity.
They
and-
probably just assumed that's the way the whole world was.
Right, yeah.
Because
they
that
didn't
was
know.
their whole
So they
world.
didn't know they were poor.
Yeah.
Well, don't we? I mean,
Yeah.
if we're not exposed to anything else, that's our normal.
Yeah.
That's
And,
right.
on that same theme, my mom's family did know they were poor. There were 10 kids, and they were an immigrant family, and she was born in 1909, and she was the youngest of the 10.
Yeah.
But they had such a family synergy and so much humor that it didn't matter. They found their way to do things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in fact, the title of the book is Can We Come In and Laugh Too? And the way the title came is that their neighbors used to knock at their door because they'd always hear the laughter. And they would say, "Can we come in and laugh too?"
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I need to correct myself. When I said they didn't have water, I meant they didn't have indoor water. Obviously, they
Didn't
need
have-
water to survive. But
Didn't have running water.
all right.
Yes. Okay. You need to find out about their childhood. What kind of a childhood did they actually have? Where did they live as a child? And where did they go to school? Because those could be very important things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Debbie?
So, in their adulthood, did they have any further education? What was their first job? What other jobs did they do? You have to find out, did they marry? If so, who did they marry? Did they have any children? How many? Where did they live?
I think all that's very important.
Yeah.
It sets the stage for a lot of times what's going on in childhood as well as adulthood is what leads someone to do or to act. Just like in your story, Morgan, when she was 16 and she hired someone to,
Right.
she was really still a child in a way.
Oh, she was absolutely a child. And in
Yes.
fact, the prison or the jail that she was sentenced to is the one where they film or they use for Orange is the New Black.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
She was 18, not quite 18 when she went to jail, and it was an adult jail. And she describes in the book what it was like to be a teenager in this adult jail.
Wow. Well, we mentioned that the hometown or the country. What was life like in that hometown or country where they're from? So the country can make a difference as well, not just what the home life was, but where they were from, because economic differences and
Yeah.
social differences. And how did they feel about life in their hometown or that country? And I'm just curious, Debbie, how was it for Lupe growing up? Did she grow up in an immigrant family, or was she born here in the U.S.?
She was born in Colorado,
Okay.
in Junta, Colorado, but her older sister and brother were born in Mexico.
Okay.
And then her father went through all the regular processes, came here from Mexico legally, and started working for the railroad. And so he works at Santa Fe Railroad, and they were living in Colorado, and then suddenly, they would move back and forth. Like she was a migrant worker, basically. They
Okay.
picked fruit in the summertime when they were out of school. So but her mom made it sound like fun. Again, her mom let's do a contest, see who could pick the most walnuts or who could pick the most peaches or whatever.
So it was
They
a game.
She made a game out of it, and the kids would, play along. This is what they did during their summers when they were off from school. Then eventually they moved to Satakoy, and her mother passed away suddenly from cancer when she was 13. So that was devastating.
Well, that's how you make the book interesting, though, is bringing in those elements.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. And then we have the situation where a lot of these books are written about people who are famous. Mm-hmm. And let's get into some prompts for that because, a writer never knows when they're going to be approached to see if they'll help somebody write their memoir or their autobiography, and that person is famous, but they're not a writer.
Right.
And some of the things you can find out is what area of life is the person famous for? Is it politics, music, film, or a whole host of other things? Or maybe they accomplished something that set them apart from everybody else. Mm-hmm. And how did they first become interested or involved in whatever this is that made them famous? What point in life did it start? Was it something they always knew they wanted to do, or did it kind of present itself at some point in their life? And if this is the case, if there's somebody who is famous, when was it that they first became well known? We hear of these overnight successes, and then when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, you find that they're a 25-year overnight success.
Exactly.
We've been talking about that over the last several shows.
And they've paid all their dues, and nobody ever noticed them, and all of a sudden, whammo, they're on the scene.
Overnight success.
Yeah.
And people think, oh, man, I wish that could happen to me. Look at them. They're an overnight success. Yeah, and another thing is, what were the most important events during the time that they became known? And we can go into historical eras and what the world was like and how it related to what was happening to them.
And, that's real important to understand what's going on at the time you wrote that particular part of the story.
Absolutely. And then did they have difficult times? I mean, if they didn't, then they were somebody that the light was shining down on, because I think all of us have had difficult times in our life.
Yeah.
And what were their most exciting things? Depending on what area of fame these people fall into, it could be a variety of things that were exciting for them. Did they travel to other countries? Who were the interesting people that they met along their road?
Right.
And, of course, did they receive any awards for their work or achievement?
Yeah.
Right. It kind of makes me think about Elvis Presley, because that 40th anniversary is this last week.
Yeah.
And look at him. He went into the service in the 50s.
Yeah, he did have an interesting life prior to.
Yeah. During the Korean thing. He knew he had something going on, but I don't think he had a clue how famous he would become.
Oh, probably not. Yeah.
No, yeah.
And he and Nixon got together, and they were going to solve the drug problem. I mean, he had something going on.
Unfortunately,
he has an
consumed
interesting story.
most of them himself.
Well,
He was the drug problem.
I think between the two of them, they could have cured the problem. So, life at that moment, if the person is still alive, where is the person living now? How old are they now? What is their life like now? I mean, these are all really relevant questions.
Yeah, because you do want to know when you're reading the story, are they still alive? And if they are, where are they?
Like in Lupe's particular case, she is still alive.
Yeah.
And so everybody, I want to meet her. So,
She's a character.
Yeah. And you want to know, have there been any important events in their life recently, something that's not been written about? And have they gotten any, do they have any important events coming up in the future? All relevant.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes with the book's already written, it's kind of hard to go back unless you do a revision. But
Yeah.
And Debbie?
So later in life, if the person is no longer living, where was the person living at the end of their life? And then you might want to find out, what was their life like at this time? What other things did they do in their life? When did they die? Where did they die? Where are they buried? And how are they remembered today?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I hate to do this, but we are running out of time. So I'm going to ask real quickly, and we got to keep this short. What advice would you give someone attempting to write a biography or a memoir, Debbie?
I would say make sure you get interview permissions.
Oh, yeah.
Either others for your quotes for your book, because I've learned the hard way that some folks have second thoughts when they realize what they said after they see it in print. And they have a change of heart, and then it causes a lot of angst and a lot of sleepless nights for the author, me.
Yeah.
So I also recommend, secondly, to hire a good editor.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because after years of looking at something, even if you let it sit a while, you're still too close to it.
All right.
Sarah Ann Fox was an excellent editor for me and helped me with some great transition.
And what about for you, Morgan?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with Debbie completely about hiring a good editor and getting your permissions as needed. And I think you also have to be sure that you check and research any information about historical events that might have happened during the period of time, the characteristics of locations, because you might not be familiar. If you're writing for somebody else, you might not be familiar with that area.
All right. And Debbie, we're to the last few minutes, so real quickly, where can we learn more about Uncompromised, the Lupe Anquiano story?
Well, we have a website, lupeanquianostory.com, and you can search us on Amazon, Uncompromised, the Lupe Anquiano Story, and we have a Facebook page, Uncompromised.
All right. And Morgan, what about Incest, Murder, and a Miracle?
IncestmurderandaMiracle.com has all kinds of pages on it, including the ability to send messages to Rob or Cheryl. And we're on Amazon. We're on just about every online bookstore that you can find, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, everything.
Okay. Well, we're down to the last minute of the show, and I'd like to thank our guests, Debbie Wright and Morgan St. James, along with my co-host, Janet Coursey. And you can find the video of our past shows on youtube.com. Just go to youtube.com/aspects of writing, or you can go to our website at aspectsofwriting.com. There you will find links to our show on iHeartRadio, Roku Radio, YouTube, and AMFM247.com. In addition, we archive all of our shows on our website. And we also do the video there, the most recent video. Yeah. We will be talking about a chapter of my new book, The Alien Transcripts, at the end of each show starting next week.
And I've already started the reading and the writing.
So until next week, this is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Morgan.
Thank you.
And thank both of you for having us on.
You're
Great
welcome.
show.
Thank you.